So do you want to say something to the 4 people that are watching?
Oh. No?
You know?
Not really.
Okay.
What do you do every 50?
Database management, grant writing.
Wow.
That was very impressive.
See, this is why you kind of test these things. We're going to be starting very shortly, so I know Nate's going to be the official introduction beginning, but we'll be starting very soon. Thank you very much. There we go.
That's it.
Good evening. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for coming out. My name is Nate Howland. I'm the chair of the Energy Committee of the Vermont Catholic Sierra Club. And I do want to thank everybody for coming out. It turned out to be a kind of sunny evening. I know you didn't come here to listen to me talk, so I'll keep my remarks very brief. But I do want to send out a couple of appreciations. One, I want to appreciate our panelists for coming tonight. Thank you. And Patsky, our moderator, appreciate that. I also want to thank the Unitarian Church of Montpelier. And then I want to send some appreciation out to our event sponsors. So that's Progressive Asset Management, that's Main Street Landing, Aquavidia Kombucha, and Skinny Pancake. And then I want to send a big shout out and appreciation to Jillian in the back for carrying the bulk of the laboring more to put this together. So as you probably know, the Vermont Chapter Sierra Club and 350 Vermont are actively pursuing fossil fuel divestment campaigns. And we're thrilled that it's finally, we're getting some really meaningful traction on this issue. As you're probably aware, there's divestment bills in both chambers of the State House, as well as a joint resolution. We met with Treasurer Pierce multiple times. Just yesterday, in fact, she issued a press release on climate change engagement. Nate McBride was on Vermont Edition last week, talking about divestment. And of course, in the state, we've had 3 colleges divest or commit to divesting from fossil fuels. And then there's lots of worldwide movement and traction. The Guardian recently divested, of course, I'm sure you've heard of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund divested as well. So we're thrilled about the traction that divestment is getting. And we're going to dig into that conversation a little more tonight. We're going to have this panel discussion and then followed by a Q&A. So hang on to your questions, and I'll run around with the mic and we'll make sure we answer your questions. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you our moderator, Kathy Bloom. She's on the board of 350 Vermont. She also is a co-founder of Vermont Debate, which is a sustainability game. She's a writer, an actor, and perhaps most apropos tonight, a climate activist. So, Kathy?
Hello, everybody. I am so honored to be here and to be sharing the dais, as it were, with these remarkable panelists. They have so much great information for you, and I don't want to keep you from their wisdom for a second longer than necessary. I do want to take a moment, though, to put this evening into a bit of context. We all get so busy rolling along with our work and the day-to-day demands of our lives that we sometimes don't get a chance to step back and realize exactly where we are. And I think where we are right now is a historic moment, and it's worth taking a breath to honor and acknowledge it. Okay, show of hands. How many of you remember the first time you heard about climate change? Yeah, I do. And for me, it's a huge, indelible, where were you at on 9/11 kind of memory for me. Way back in 1989, this young gonzo journalist from The New Yorker named Bill McKibben published a book called The End of Nature. And he described in it a horrific scenario in which the burning of fossil fuels heats up the planet, melts the ice caps, raises the seas, floods the coasts, causes droughts, floods, fires, epic storms, and generally renders the planet a less than cozy and habitable place for us and most of the other critters with which we share this tiny blue ball in space. I'm in Seattle in 1989, the summer before my senior year in college, and I'm sitting in my boyfriend's kitchen reading a review of this incredibly appealing little tome in the Seattle Weekly. And I start feeling my blood being replaced with ice water. And the hairs on the back of my neck start to curdle. And it's the first of what I would call, and this is the PG-rated version of this experience, a holy freaking crap moment. And you guys ever experienced that? The Weekly even runs a sidebar piece about what Seattle would look like under 20 feet of water. And they show a mock-up illustration of the Space Needle half submerged in the rising tide. Now, the only good news in the face of this nightmarish narrative is that the scientists are saying it's not going to happen for hundreds of years. It's way far off in the future, which will hopefully give us plenty of time to solve the problem before things get, shall we say, charismatic. But I remember thinking, wow, I have no desire to see that. None. And that was the first time in my life that I didn't want to live forever. Well, it turns out you don't have to live forever to see things that you really don't want to see. Now, fast forward to 2008, when NASA's chief climate scientist, James Hansen, writes a paper saying that the maximum safe level for atmospheric carbon dioxide is 350 parts per million, a number that we had then and certainly have now already blown way past. But armed with that number, Bill and a small group of Middlebury College students take up the charge, and a global climate movement is born. The first set of tactics had to do with just getting the world to understand and pay attention to what was going on. Then, they had to figure out what we were going to do to fix the problem. Now, stop burning fossil fuels is the simple answer, but the reality is profoundly complex, and painfully hamstrung by the fact that the fossil fuel companies are regularly making more money than God. Forgive me, Unitarian Church. And they have absolutely no desire to see even a microscopic dent in their galactic profit margin. They also have a lot of cash to throw around, fund the campaigns of morally bankrupt legislators, and obscure even the clearest of scientific arguments. Now, here's where things get both interesting and relevant to tonight's discussion. In 2012, When Bill and 350 first started talking about divesting from the fossil fuel industry as a significant tactic for climate activism, the argument, much like when we were fighting apartheid in South Africa, was primarily an ethical one. They basically said, these companies are making money hand over fist by polluting the planet to the brink of extinction. And if you care about the fate of the world, then you have a moral imperative to withdraw your investments. And as Nate said, that argument has worked pretty well for quite a number of colleges, municipalities, and in a moment of exquisite irony, the Rockefeller Foundation. But what we've come to learn is that for a number of reasons, which I think this panel will share, it's actually also sound financial behavior. The Guardian just last week reported that over the last 5 years, investors who have done holdings in coal, oil, and gas earned an average return of 1.2% more a year than people who stayed tied to the fossil fuel industry. Now, to bring this all back to a very personal perspective, I run this community climate game called Vermont today, and this year we were looking to hire an intern from Champlain College to help us out. One of the candidates who we eventually hired was a senior from New Jersey named Rob. Now, Rob wants to be an investment banker. He was very clear about that when he graduates, and it was obvious from his application that he doesn't have much experience with or even very much interest in climate change. So I asked him why he wanted to intern with us, a nonprofit climate game. And he said, well, I totally get that fossil fuels aren't a good investment anymore. That's obvious. And I want to work with you guys so I can learn about alternative energy, and it'll be a valuable piece of knowledge to have on my resume. I was blown away. A 20-year-old pinstripe-wearing business major from New Jersey who states as inarguable fact that fossil fuel investments are a sinking ship. It's hardly just a moral argument anymore. And that is why this is a historic moment. This is the moment when the tide is really starting to turn. And if we are brave and determined enough, we all have the opportunity to be part of it in a really big way. So with that, let's turn to our panel and get really down and dirty on divestment. Now, a little side note here. All of these folks sitting at this table have resumes that are as long as, well, not mine, more like Bill's are. And there's nothing more draining to an audience than reading a really long bio. So by way of introduction, I'm just going to give you their highlights. But trust me when I tell you that these folks are educated, credentialed, experienced, and passionate. They are here tonight because they are people who know. Our first panelist is Beth Sawin from Climate Interactive. Beth has a PhD in biology from MIT, so glad you really tell you everything you need to know right there. She has studied and taught system dynamics and sustainability with the Noah Meadows and the Sustainability Institute, and her work focuses on finding climate solutions, building resilience to climate impacts, and helping leaders increase their capacity for making profound and positive change. Take it away, Beth.
I want to make sure the microphone is working. You all can hear me in the back? Great. Well, Kathy kicked this off really well. She just gave the first paragraph of my speech. I appreciate that. So we're here and we're going to talk really about two reasons for divestment and two types of risk that divestment is an excellent solution to mitigate. The first risk is the financial risk to the pension holders who need to be secure in their retirement. The second risk is the climate risk that those pension holders hold, and so do all of us. I'm going to focus mostly on the climate risk. I know that Eric and Matt are going to walk you through the financial equations of financial risk associated with holding fossil fuel investments. I'm going to talk about the climate risk and how divestment connects to that, because that's been the bread and butter of my work now for about 18 years. So I lead a group of computer modelers. We build models of complex systems, including the global climate and global energy system. We built models of cities responding to flood under climate change, models of African countries responding to drought under climate change. In every one of those models, what we're doing is working with decision makers to help them look at what their choices are today and how those choices are going to play out under different climate scenarios, and really importantly, how their choices actually determine which climate scenarios are the ones that play out. One of the great privileges of getting to do this kind of work is that I've sat with probably hundreds of people facing these questions about the future. These questions about where should we act, what policy, should we plant trees, should we build carbon tax, should we build levees and dikes, should we educate people, and on and on and on. You start to see patterns when you sit with those questions with enough people in enough different places. And I want to share with you a couple of those patterns, because actually they're pretty simple. So no matter which model we're using and which country we're working, the scenarios where people decide to turn away from fossil fuels sooner rather than later, those are the scenarios with the least risk of dangerous climate change. The scenarios where we wait, where we let it go longer and longer, those are the scenarios with the most risk of dangerous climate change. And those are the scenarios where the goals start slipping away from us. Right? Eventually, you reach a point where certain climate goals are just not achievable anymore. That's just the inexorable math of how CO2 works in the atmosphere. Because divestment is a solution, a lever in this battle to make that shift away from fossil fuels, those same patterns apply to divestment. The sooner we divest, the less risk of dangerous climate change. The longer we wait, the more risk. The sooner we shift, the more goals stay open and attainable. The longer we wait to divest, the longer we wait to shift, the more those goals slip out of reach. So that's one of my connections to the future, is just through my profession as a modeler. I'm also a mother of 2 teenage daughters who are actually in the room today. One of them's holding up a video camera. And so that's another connection that I have to the future. That really struck home for me the year my older daughter was a freshman in high school, which happened to be the year of Tropical Storm Irene. And so on top of all those normal transitions, like going from middle school to high school, being the first kid who didn't know anybody else in a new school, suddenly she was thrust into the middle of a community in a disaster zone. This was Woodstock Union High School. If anyone's from that part of Vermont, you know what it looked like, right? Route 4 in front of the high school, totally torn to pieces. The school closed for over a week. When they went back to school, they didn't have any clean water. The kids were drinking bottled water, using portable toilets for weeks. And that's what my kids' lives, their generation's lives, are going to be. They're going to have to do the same things I had to do, figure out a purpose, a meaning, a career, possibly meet partners, think about having children. But they're going to have to do all of that in a world that's a lot more challenging because of extreme climate impacts. And nothing we're going to talk about here tonight is going to change that, right? That's already done. That's the CO2 that's already been released, the decisions that have already been made. What we're here to talk about tonight is the difference between a really challenging future to navigate and an unmanageable future. Those are the choices that are left because we've left this so long. So that's my second connection to the future. First one is profession, the second one is a parent and the responsibilities to the future that comes with that. And so I've been thinking about the decisions before the Vermont Pension Investment Committee. I don't know if there's any members of that committee here, but actually I believe you have a lot in common in your work with what I have in mind. My colleagues and I, we work with analysis and data and projections, but always in this backdrop of risk and uncertainty. And at the end of the day, we do the best we can with what we know. The good thing when you're facing this divestment question is actually there's not much of a tension, because as you're going to hear from the other panelists, what's good financial management is actually good climate management. So it's actually not one of those cases where there's this great tension between multiple goals. The goals line up. But even so, it's a political world, it's a complicated world. And so I was asking myself what I could offer, what I could bring from my world and my colleagues that could be useful in weighing these decisions about divestment. And there's a few things I'd like to share. The first point is, it's not too late. Right? I want to say that again, because people are somehow missing this critical point. I feel like the world has gone from climate change isn't a problem, so we don't have to do anything, to, oh, it's too late, so we don't have to do anything. But actually, there's a whole universe in between those two, and that's where we live right now. It's really urgent, and it's not too late. I could go on and on about our models, about technology, about policy, about the fact that the technologies are here and the rates of change are feasible and are actually starting to kick in. But the most important thing is just, it's not too late. The second lesson stands right up there against that it's not too late, which is time is incredibly short, unbelievably short. To explain that, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of the carbon budget. And if you've read any of Bill's work in the last years, you know probably this idea, so I'll be brief with it. The carbon budget is just an estimate of how much more carbon dioxide we can pump up into the atmosphere while keeping a really important climate goal possible. And that's the goal of limiting temperature increase to 2 degrees, a goal all the countries of the world have said is important, is critical. Scientists can estimate that number now, climate scientists have. You can think of it in an abstract way. Just picture, a giant vessel up there in the atmosphere. That's the carbon budget. Every time someone down here on the surface of the Earth burns some oil or coal or natural gas, we add a little CO2 to that bucket. When it gets full, the carbon budget is used up. The chances for a 2-degree future are over, okay? That's what the carbon budget is all about. If you know how big that vessel is and you know how fast we're adding CO2 to it, then you can tell when will it be when we hit that point when the carbon budget is used up. And one of the models our group has built is just a little calculator that comes to those two things. How big is the bucket and how fast are we filling it? And so before coming here tonight, I ran a few scenarios using that calculator. And I want to just walk you through them because they're very interesting. So the first scenario is what if the future kind of looks pretty much like the past? So over the past decade, year after year, there's an incremental increase in how much CO2 the global population has been putting into the atmosphere. If we just project that same rate of increase into the future, 22 years from now, that's how long it would take to fill up that bucket, that capacity, that carbon budget. Now I was thinking about that number, 22 years, and I thought about my other daughter's 9th grade social studies teacher, who I guess is about 30 years old. She's young, she just had her first baby. She's probably someone who has a retirement account in the Vermont pension fund. And I was thinking, 22 years, she's going to be in her early 50s. She won't even be tapping that retirement fund yet. And the possibility of a 2-degree future, what climate scientists say is a risky but livable future, is already out of reach for her baby daughter, who would be probably getting her first job out of college. All right, so that's not going to work. Business as usual, keep doing the same thing. We don't want that. That's unacceptable. All right, well, let's say we do something the world's governments, despite having met for 20 years, haven't been able to do. We at least stop that increase. We just hold things steady. All right, so I ran the same tool with that scenario. Instead of more and more emissions, we just freeze them today. Next year, no more than this year. The year after that, no more than this year. That stretches out the carbon budget a little bit. My daughter's teacher would be in her late 50s instead of her early 50s. All right, it doesn't really matter for anyone who comes after that. For all intents and purposes, that goal is forever out of reach. Okay, so if flat's not good enough, what has to happen? You have to go down, that's the only other choice. So I did another scenario. I said, what if by 2050 we reduce emissions 80% below what they are today? All right, here's the good news. That works. My daughter's teacher would live through her retirement, happy old age. Her daughter would have a happy old age, and we would be staying below the carbon budget. That's what I mean when I say it's not too late. Okay? But I did one more scenario. This is probably the most important one. I said, what if we kept that same level of ambition, 80% below current levels by 2050? But what if we waited 10 years? What if we took 10 years to get ourselves organized, to work out all these political differences that we have? What if we let the fossil fuel companies continue their war of propaganda for 10 more years? In that scenario, my daughter's teacher would be in her early 80s when we used up the carbon budget. Now maybe that sounds great, like, yeah, we really bought some time, but it's still used up. I don't think people who come after us and future generations are going to care how long we stretched it out. If we used it up, if we limited their chances for a stable climate, who cares when it happened? All right, so that's the importance of the next 10 years. If you're wondering why college students all over this country are sitting in their president's offices, it's because they understand that math. They know they don't have time to get seniority, to work their way up to be managers of pension funds, right, to get elected into the Vermont legislature. By the time they manage to do that, that carbon budget is going to be filled up to the point where it's not feasible, it's not manageable. Where that choice between a challenging future and an unmanageable future has already been made for them. So that's what divestment is about, because divestment is about part of that shift. And it doesn't mean this year we've got to squeeze every drop of carbon out of the atmosphere, out of the economy. It just means we got to start turning it in the opposite direction. Instead of more and more and more, we got to start turning it down, less and less and less. And actually, it's not that mysterious how that happens, right? It just means somewhat less investment in digging up coal, oil, and gas, and somewhat more investment in insulating our homes and building efficient public transportation and scaling up renewable energy. It means shifting investment from dirty, polluting fossil fuels into clean, renewable energy. And that's what divestment is about. It's about saying that's the direction that we need to go. And it's acknowledging that the time to do that is really, really short. And we need every tool we can possibly muster. So I told you one story about one of my daughters. I want to end with a story about my other daughter, who was born in the year 2000. And she was one of those babies who liked to be walked around. So we took lots of walks through our neighborhood. And one of those walks led us past the milking parlor of a neighbor's dairy farm. And I remember standing in the doorway there, jiggling the baby, and an announcement came on the radio. And they said that the Vermont legislature had just passed the first civil unions bill in the country. And I remember thinking, wow, this is important. Something significant just happened. So that baby's 15 years old now. And I look across this country and I look at what has happened in terms of marriage equality in her lifetime. And I see how our small state, our courageous state, our state that has the kind of democracy most other states in this country don't have anymore, launched an idea that's still rolling across the country, that's still creating change. And when I think about the opportunity now before Vermont, to think about taking another step that's anchored in common sense and anchored in morality and anchored in a commitment to the future. And I think about the power of what one small state can do to ripple across a country or ripple across the world. When I think about that, my opinion as a climate modeler is exactly the same as my opinion as a mother. It's exactly the same as my opinion, my civic opinion as a Vermonter, which is this is just too important of an opportunity and too obvious of a choice. Thanks.
Thank you, Beth. Hold this for this sort of moment. There is also some powerful financial theory behind divestment. And to help us understand that better, we've got Eric Becker from Clean Yield Asset Management. Eric holds a BA in comparative religion from Haverford College, which makes all of this very relevant for him, and has been engaged in social and environmental investing since 1993. He's a founding member of the Slow Money Alliance, a network of investors, farmers, and activists. He co-founded both Greater Boston Slow Money and Slow Money Vermont, and was also a founding board member of the Carrot Project, a sustainable agriculture finance organization. Eric serves as a trustee of Sterling College in Craftsbury Common and is a senior fellow of the Environmental Leadership Program. Eric.
So that's a tough act to follow. That was great. So I'm going to talk about two kinds of risks as they relate to investment portfolios. And then I'm going to talk a bit about the idea that it's important to keep a seat at the proverbial table to influence fossil fuel companies. The first kind of risk is the carbon bubble, which is the risk that fossil fuel companies are grossly overvalued because they will never be able to realize value from at least two-thirds of their proven reserves. The second I will call performance risk, that is the perceived risk that you have to give up investment returns to divest from fossil fuel stocks. So we'll start with the carbon bubble. The carbon bubble is directly related to the carbon budget that Beth just talked about. Science tells us that we can only grow a limited amount of additional carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for to maintain a livable climate on planet Earth. The International Energy Agency stated in its World Energy Outlook 2012, this isn't new information, no more than 1/3 of proven reserves of fossil fuels can be consumed prior to 2050 if the world is to achieve the 2°C goal. That means that 2/3 of the proven reserves that fossil fuel companies have on their books must remain in the ground if we're to maintain a livable planet. Other studies more recently have shown that the figure is more like 80% that of reserves need to be kept in the ground, and those reserves keep on growing because the fossil fuel companies keep on spending billions and exploring. As it becomes starkly clear that we must, as a society, drastically reduce the burning of fossil fuels or face dire repercussions, government policies and regulations that substantially raise the costs of extracting and burning fossil fuels are increasingly likely in the coming years. Society may yet decide that we cannot let those reserves be consumed at any cost. When that comes to pass, the companies that have fossil fuel reserves on their books will find that they can never monetize those reserves, and they'll have to be written off as so-called stranded assets. Investing in companies with these stranded assets on their books carries substantial financial risk that is most certainly not yet reflected in their stock prices. The European investment firm Kepler estimates that if we put ourselves on a path to stay under the 2°C target, fossil fuel company revenues will be 28 trillion with a T lower over the next 20 years compared to business as usual. That's a big number. And yet the fossil fuel companies, as I said, keep on spending tens of billions of dollars per year to search for new fossil fuel reserves that can never be extracted under any scenario where we have a stable climate. Ernst & Young estimates that global spending on oil and gas exploration was $88 billion in 2013, up from $56 billion in 2009. So not only are they doing it, they're increasingly doing it. As an investor, do you want to own shares in companies pouring enormous sums of money into finding resources that can never be turned into profits? That is a very risky proposition. I want to make it clear that it's not climate activists saying these things. Kepler is an investment firm that was founded as part of the traditional Swiss bank, Julius Baer. And Standard & Poor's Rating Services can't be confused for an environmental think tank, but it recently issued a report that states, the financial models that use past performance and creditworthiness may be insufficient to guide investors looking to understand the possible effects of future carbon constraints on the oil sector. It's important to note that many of these financial impacts will be felt even if there is no coordinated global effort to reduce emissions. Even a piecemeal approach will likely profoundly affect the profitability and balance sheets of fossil fuel companies. The Generation Foundation, which is associated with blood and gore, published an excellent report recently on the subject that identifies 3 public policy-related risks to fossil fuel companies, namely increased regulation of many kinds, market forces, including the increasing availability of affordable clean energy alternatives, and, most relevant probably to the divestment movement, socio-political pressures that may create a hostile operating environment for fossil fuel businesses. College presidents at this moment might be familiar with those pressures. The point is that the risks for companies with significant carbon resources on their books is very real and will likely come into sharper focus in the near future. In my view, continuing to invest in these companies is a far greater risk than the minuscule risks of avoiding them. Which brings me to the second risk, the risk that fossil fuel-free portfolios will underperform portfolios that hold fossil fuel companies. It is an article of faith among many investment professionals that by eliminating fossil fuel companies from the universe of investment options, one is dooming oneself to subpar returns. A recent study by Imperio Group, an investment management firm specializing in custom indexing, showed that not only was the return penalty a myth, but over the 25-year period of the study, the fossil fuel-free portfolio outperformed its benchmark by a fraction of a percent, 0.05%, de minimis. And that study doesn't include 2014, the year in which the energy sector, the stocks in the energy sector, fell by 7.8%, while the market as a whole rose 12.6%, a difference of over 20%. When those numbers are figured in, the conclusion is even clearer that over the past 26 years, fossil fuel-free portfolios would have outperformed. This flies in the face of estimates by NAPC, New England Pension Consultants, which is the state of Vermont's pension investment consultant. They estimated a 0.25% to 0.5% annual return penalty for fossil fuel divestment. The Vermont Pension Investment Committee used NAPC's report to estimate foregone returns for the Vermont pension funds of $10 million annually, about 2 to 8%. Those assumptions are clearly flawed, but those are the assumptions that are in front of Treasurer Beth Pierce and the legislature. My point is not that fossil fuel stocks are certain to underperform going forward, but it's quite possible, and just as likely as the possibility that they outperform. There's a strong trend of reversion to the mean in investment markets. Things go in cycles of outperformance and underperformance, with the results generally washing out over long periods of time. I'd like to finish by challenging the assertion made by Treasurer Pierce and others that by divesting fossil fuel stocks, the state would lose its seat at the table in engaging fossil fuel companies to improve their environmental performance. This statement is problematic in two ways. First, even after having divested, the state could remain engaged with the investor network on climate risk, which is the main venue for engagement regarding climate change between state pension funds and corporations. The treasurer could continue to play an important role in the coalition by signing on to letters to corporate executives, filing climate change-related shareholder proposals at non-fossil fuel companies, and participating in dialogues. More importantly, in the context of the climate crisis and the carbon bubble, shareholder engagement with fossil fuel companies is a woefully inadequate tool. Institutional investors and asset owners owe it to themselves to understand when engagement works and when it doesn't. Engagement succeeds when shareholders make a persuasive case that a change in behavior will enhance shareholder value, reduce business or reputation risk, or both. Ethical imperatives rarely carry the day on their own. Shareholder engagement is bound to fail when the goal is to change the core business of the corporation. And that is the case with fossil fuel companies. To maintain a whole planet, fossil fuel companies need to be put out of business over the coming decades. Engaging these companies on their environmental reporting and performance will not move the needle in the battle to keep fossil fuels in the ground. I applaud Treasurer Pierce for her recent increase in shareholder advocacy efforts, particularly her work to improve disclosure of corporate political contributions and to push companies to adopt responsible sourcing of palm oil. Those are important and potentially effective efforts. And you can read about this. She just issued a press release yesterday that's on her website. But on climate change, engaging fossil fuel companies isn't going far enough or fast enough to make a difference. Treasurer Pierce is going to speak on behalf of a shareholder proposal at ExxonMobil's annual meeting next month, calling for the company to set greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. A similar resolution has been filed every year since 2007, but it hasn't had a meaningful impact on ExxonMobil's behavior. It's generally received between 30% declines from 30% level down to about 22% last year of affirmative votes for it. At the stockholder meeting, we heard Treasurer Pierce to speak the truth to ExxonMobil, that as much as any other company in its industry, the bulk of its reserves must be left unburned. And to make Vermont's financial future consistent with this truth, she should commit to divesting its pension funds over a 5-year period. Fossil fuel companies are risky investments that undermine every other effort the state is making to break our fossil fuel addiction. So let's reshape the conversation based on that inconvenient truth.
I just want to do a quick check. Can everybody hear okay? There's room up front if anybody feels the need to move up front, don't be shy. Now, one of the questions that many people ask when learning about divestment is whether or not it actually works. Fortunately, it does. And for some serious success stories, we look no farther than Patsky Patsky from Trillium Asset Management. Matt has a BS in economics from Rensselaer Polytech, and he's got 3 decades of experience in investment research and investment management. He's worked at Lehman Brothers, where he became the first sell-side analyst in the US to publish on the topic of socially responsible investing. He worked at Winslow Management Company in Boston, where he served as portfolio manager for the Green Solutions Strategy and the Winslow Green Solutions Fund. Matt is a member of the Social Venture Network and serves on the board of Environment League of Massachusetts, Shared Interest, and ProMohair. Matt.
Thank you. And just to clarify, I noticed a little chuckle in the room. Publishing on social responsible investment at Lehman. It was not at Lehman Brothers where I published. I actually started writing about environmental social factors and how they impacted the value of company franchises at Lehman. And it was suggested to me that that was not a good idea for my career. I left Lehman and published on socially responsible investing at a different investment bank. So just to clarify that, because I did notice that. Well, that wasn't where I published it, but I did indeed start incorporating environmental social impact while a sell-side analyst. Thank you very much. I'm going to just sort of deviate from my remarks to the comment Beth has made about the role, the leadership role Vermont took on LGBT equality. And just say, indeed, we saw what has been monumental in terms of the movement toward LGBT equality across the U.S. And the Supreme Court is obviously here today. What hopefully will be a final case. Hopefully resolve this once and for all. But it is different than this battle because there's a lot more money coming against us. There was certainly money that was thrown against LGBT equality, but nowhere near the money that's being thrown against this. And while I don't know if anyone in the room wants to raise their hand as being a representative for the American Petroleum Institute, I will assure you someone's here. Because everywhere I've ever spoken, there's been someone from the American Petroleum Institute. That's a lot of money to send people to town meetings, to send people to every state house meeting. You know, yeah, but they are there, and they show up, and they ask questions, and it's I'll relay this one just because I thought it was interesting. At the State House, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the question was, what about all the jobs that will be lost? And the state rep retorted really quick, how many of them will be in Massachusetts? And the person just sat down, because of course, New England is not a place where there's an awful lot of jobs being created from the traditional energy sector. When we look at the space from Trillium's perspective, first, I would be negligent not to thank Eric Becker for the incredible role he played at Trillium in introducing fossil fuel-free portfolio strategies at Trillium over the years he was at Trillium. I had been doing similar work at Winslow Management and joined Trillium 5.5 years ago. Was thrilled to find a strategy called Sustainable Opportunities that was developed by Eric, which was focused on trying to look for positive environmental and social characteristics in companies and building a portfolio of positive characteristic companies. The approach, when you look at the history for Trillium, was not about excluding the traditional energy sector. It was about including positive companies that had positive environmental impact. And therefore, didn't have any traditional coal, oil, or natural gas companies in the portfolio. So we had a history at the firm now right around 20 years of managing portfolios that are fossil fuel free. The portfolio that dates back the longest has outperformed by 35 basis points per year on average. When I hear the response that we get so often of, we can't afford to do this, it's too risky, there's too much volatility. I look at that portfolio and think, boy, there certainly not anxious to see this. I will caution us all not to get too excited about 1.2%. Introduction with this since the call for divestment over the last 3 years, fossil fuel-free portfolios have outperformed by 1.2% per year. True. So we have to remember this was a very bad period for traditional energy. And so we don't want to be out sort of promising excessive output. So we do want to be aware that there's going to be cycles as Eric referenced. And so we certainly all agree that coal is in long-term decline, and we have no reason to be invested in coal. There could be a sector, a cycle in which oil rebounds, and if it rebounds, fossil fuel-free portfolios may have a period of underperformance, and that's we caution all the clients that is just sort of ultimately could be a near-term impact that they'll have to weather if there's a rebound in oil prices. Certainly, we believe that oil likewise will enter a period of long-term decline. We think that'll be true for natural gas, but certainly it is, I think, undeniable for even those who love fossil fuels to deny that coal is not in long-term decline. There is no justification for being invested in coal, and yet those who index are invested in coal. It's the dirtiest of all the fossil fuels, and you're not making money being invested in an industry that's in such long-term decline. So it is certainly that when we see Stanford announce that they're committing to 5 years to divesting coal, it's not that bold a commitment, but it's certainly I applaud. It's a step in the right direction, but I know that was their response to 350.1. As I mentioned on the portfolios, we focused on trying to look at positive characteristics to investing, and so we've been very heavy investors in energy efficiency, power generation that's focused on solar, wind, geothermal, other technologies that are more efficiently creating electricity with the reduced carbon footprint, storage and distribution, which is very important for how we expand power generation for renewables, transportation, more energy efficient transportation methods, so rail and mass transit in particular, sustainable agriculture, water, and sustainable design. So we're looking at different sectors where there's opportunity for faster growth to make sure that we're focusing, putting more money to work. So when we look at not being exposed to what is 13% of the S&P 500, that's where the money is put back to work. So again, trying to focus on investing in positive environmental and social impacts. So I would also like to say an incredible thank you to Bill McKibben from 350.org, who's keeping Eric and my phone ringing nonstop. The call for divestment, while it was, I think, made it just sort of a simpler request, because it was a very discreet request to sell these 200 names that are in the traditional energy space. It has left everybody questioning how they're invested. It has left everybody questioning why they can't invest with alignment of their values. And it is causing a lot of people to come to sort of question how they're invested. And for that, we all give an incredible thank you. 2%. So with that, I'll just say thank you and turn it over to Bill. Thanks.
people that you wish were in the room tonight know that Orca Media and Bob Green Guy are filming this, and it will be posted online afterwards. And so it is not lost to history and the ether at all. So, for this last introduction, I'm going to speak a little truth to power here. I have heard through the CCGN, which is the Climate Champions Gossip Network, that there are a few legislators out there who have a bit, shall we say, resistance to Bill McKibben. Word has it that he's thought of in some corners as a radical president. Nay, sort of figure, who is not going to do the hard legislative work with them so much as perhaps pester them into submission. It makes me think of what some environmental activists used to say about David Brower, who founded Earth First, the League of Conservation Voters, and headed up Sierra Club for years. They said, we need David Brower because he makes the rest of us look reasonable. Part of Bill's genius is that he's been able to take the totally unimaginable and render it completely comprehensible. He's a gifted enough writer to take potential apocalypse and turn it into discrete drops of poetry. He's got the capacity to expand our minds, break our hearts, shatter our expectations, and then hit us with enough hard facts, big vision, and crafty strategy to launch a planet-wide grassroots climate change movement. I mean, who else could convince people to dress nicely and then spend a month getting arrested outside the White House in August to protest a pipeline that nobody had even heard about at the time? Who else could be the force behind 20,000 climate rallies around the world in every single country but North Korea, so far as we know? Who else could take on the entire gazillion-dollar fossil fuel industry with fearlessness, with clarity, with immense planetary people power, and with a superhuman degree of gentle, open-hearted humility? If Bill has been bugging you, or anyone you know, if he's made a few folks uncomfortable, if he's been the cause of night sweats, daytime migraines, or a holy freaking crap moment or three, then Bill. That's his job. He's an artist of change. And like all artists, the whole point of his work is, as the playwright Arthur Miller once said, to remind people about what they've chosen to forget. And then to keep at it. To keep reminding them until remembering is inescapable and action is inevitable. If this planet, or more importantly, this civilization, has a hope in hell of surviving the climate crisis, then we have a tall, serious, hard-skiing, long-walking, profoundly prolific writer from the hills of Ripton to thank. So here we go. The man who recently had a new species of woodland gnat named after him. Gnats being married, apparently that's appropriate. Megathelminia McKibben, named in his honor, Mr. Bill McKibben. Knock it out of the park, Bill.
Thank you, Beth. Hi. Look, what a pleasure to be here. My job is to describe them. The chief of debt center is always to take care of loose ends at the end. Everybody's already covered the important points, so let me just go to say a few things. First is, the moment really is right for action. Look, I've obviously been following this a long time, and in one way it's the most hopeful, and the other the most depressing moment that we've been in. The depressing part's easy, but the planet is really starting to implode in bad ways. To look at California and see the Sierra Nevada without any snow on it for the first time anyone's ever recorded. To look at look at the study that came out today indicating that with climate change proceeding unchecked, we can expect a 6,000% increase in the number of extreme heat events over the course of the century, to look at what's going on in the Arctic and the Antarctic and the acidifying oceans and on and on and on, is to understand that we're right now in these few years at an absolute hinge moment in the history of this planet. And it's too late to stop it altogether, but it's not too late, or at least the best science would indicate, perhaps, to keep it from getting absolutely out of control. That's the depressing, hard truth. The really good truth is, for the first time in the 25 years that I've been working on this, there's a real chance of getting it under control for two reasons, really. One is the rise of this movement all over the world that finally is taking this on, and it really is an amazing movement. And you get some sense of how far it reaches when you see that today in Rome, the Vatican was talking in the strongest possible terms about all this. It's official kind of laying groundwork for Francis's upcoming encyclical, is talking about climate change as change on an almost unfathomable scale at this point. And that is just the right kind of language to use. People power, which in many ways began in Vermont, you know. There are people in this room who were on March 7 years ago, 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago, on the west side of Vermont. 1,000 of us walked up to Burlington. At the time, that was the largest demonstration about climate change that had ever taken place in the States. That has now swelled all over the world. It's beautiful to see. There are people meeting in rooms like this in every corner of the planet tonight. The other reason that it's so hopeful is that we finally have a real alternative to fossil fuel. The fact that in the last 6 years, the price of a solar panel has fallen 75%. It's this piece of new data in the system that is throwing every old assumption into question. More than half of the electric generating capacity installed around the planet last year was renewable for the first time in history. If we can speed that up, if we can accelerate it, if we can make it really work, then we've got an outside fighting chance. That's why the divestment stuff is so important right now, because it is one of the most effective monkey wrenches we can throw into the fossil fuel industry, who are the reason that it has taken so long to get anywhere. It's not because the science hasn't been clear, and it's not because we haven't done, as I say, have alternatives. It's because we have an active, powerful resistance to change that comes from the richest industry on earth. And that's why, just as with apartheid 30 years ago, we need this dramatic step of divestment to weaken their power. The one place I'll disagree with people on the panel is the idea that Vermont has the capacity to lead here. Vermont's no longer in a position, sadly, to lead. We did our best to give Beth Pierce and the legislature and the governor that chance when we sort of started this drive 4 years ago. But at this point, I mean, the fact that the Rockefellers have divested from fossil fuel and the state of Vermont hasn't is an upside down world. We're at risk of becoming, not at risk of being a leader, we're at risk of being an embarrassment. Prince Charles announced yesterday that he had divested from fossil fuels. Okay? When you have, this sort of slightly jug-eared monarch class, divesting, then it is time for Vermont to do the right thing. And I'm going to just speak completely frankly here for a minute. I am not a Vermont native. I came from the Adirondacks here. The Adirondacks is wild and woolly territory. We tend not to be quite as polite as people in Vermont. Right? So I would just say it's ridiculous that this hasn't happened already in Vermont. As with too many other issues, our leaders have been playing games. Leader Sawin had said one day that he's for it, the next day that he's not sure, and the next day that it's not the most important thing, and the next day for it again. The treasurer has been, I'll try to,
say it as it is.
Has presented a series of sham arguments that do not hold up to one piece of paper that she claims to. This NEPC study has been demonstrated time and again to be wrong. Among other things, it took the wrong class of stocks, not even the 200 that we were talking about. When you do the stocks that everyone else in the rest of the world has been divesting from, it's clear that Vermont would have been far better off to divest. Becker has cost the workers of this state large amounts of money in their pension fund. Okay? The board of trustees of the University of Vermont, appointed in part by the governor, has cost students at UVM large amounts of money that they should have had for more scholarships and more professors and more sort of things. It's one of these rare cases where one gets to do well by doing good. You know, we honor people who make great sacrifices in the name of doing the right thing. In this case, we're asking people to make money by doing the right thing. I am so glad to see my eyes are very good to make out in the back of the room. Anthony Kalina, who has been stand up on this from the beginning. Good for you, willing to do it from the House, who has been just tenacious and among other things, did his best to get the treasurer here tonight to talk with us, but with no luck. The idea that we should instead engage in something called engagement with this industry is simply wrong. There are many times when that's just the right thing to do. In fact, Treasurer first proved that it was there many times when it's the right thing to do with this. But a press release yesterday, perhaps in preparation for this evening's event, when she talked about how she persuaded the Krispy Kreme donut company to stop using the wrong kind of palm oil in their donuts. Okay? That's exactly the sort of place where shareholder engagement works, because Krispy Kreme donuts is not in the palm oil industry, they're in the donut industry. And so it's a marginal part of their business, and we can push on those sort of things and get change. If Apple's not paying the folks who make its iPhones enough, we can talk about pressure on them and boycotts and things, and eventually they get the message and they raise the pay of their workers and the cost of an iPhone goes up $1 and everybody's okay. That's not the case with fossil fuels. What we need to have happen is for them to leave 80% of their reserves in the ground, as Beth pointed out, and what we need for them to do is stop exploring for more of this stuff. We already have 5 times as much carbon in our coal, oil, and gas reserves as anybody says we can possibly burn, and yet ExxonMobil spends $100 million every day looking for more. Okay? That's crazy behavior, especially when you think about what $100 million could do in terms of production solar panels every day, hither and on. So the moment has come to do this, and the moment is, I have no idea why it's taking so long in Vermont for this to happen, but we have to, I guess, we'll see if it sort of appeals to reason and all the data and things like this work, or if we're going to have to do it the hard way. I just came back from Harvard, which, you know, a week at Harvard where we were having this argument play out. Harvard's one of the few universities that just outright said, no, we're not going to do it. It didn't completely surprise me because Harvard was very slow about everything. It was in 1869 when the president said it would take some generations before it was clear whether it was a good idea to educate women or not. And he added that he hoped that Columbia or Yale might undertake the experiments. Well, at Harvard, happily, students, faculty, and alumni really came together. And since it was Harvard, some of the alumni were great, like Natalie Portman and stuff like that. People were, I'm a little hunched over because I spent much of the week sleeping in a sleeping bag in a flower bed outside the president's office, helping students who were blockading the thing. It was remarkable to me, and it will reverberate, and if it doesn't win at Harvard, it will help in many other places. Even in the week that we were there, the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, one of the oldest and richest universities in Europe, and the place where the chemist Joseph Black discovered carbon dioxide 200 years ago, and actually it was divested. This kind of stuff now happens almost every day someplace around the world, but it is time for Vermont to get in this, do it, if only to be able to hold its head up high. So I don't really relish the thought of going and sitting in the flower beds outside the Golden Dome. But I will if I have to, and I imagine there's other people out there who will do the same thing too. Thank you guys so much.
So, we're going to open up for a few questions. Nate has a microphone that he's going to run around with, and so if raise your hand if you've got questions. He'll come straight like a honey with technology. And
before he leaves, we should also say thanks to Tommy.
Yeah, hey Tony, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Shiloh Nelson with Wonderful Voice Campaign. Glad to see some of our constituents here. Becker, thank you for a beautiful introduction. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge you and situating this gathering in its historic context. How many movements of positive social change began in an old New England church in none other than Vermont. So delighted to see everybody here. Thank you all, the panelists. I really appreciate the insight, the wisdom, the depth of understanding that each of you bring from your fields of study and discipline, and help articulate for those of us mere mortals the broader implications. I'm an opera singer by trade and training, as many of you know, not an economist or a biologist. Yes. Yeah, the question is this. I'm acutely aware that there are emerging analytics on the financial side of things, which are demonstrating that companies that apply principles of biomimicry to their business development practices are starting to outperform the market in the S&P, and there are some indexes that are starting to emerge that are showing some very compelling statistics. One of my questions is about whether those indices are being more broadly shared and understood. What can we do together to promote those performance statistics to make sure that they're getting out more broadly, so that there's a greater breadth of understanding of the economic implications of these transitions as they're happening. Thank you.
I mean, there's a lot of different indices that we're seeing with different methods, and certainly increasingly we're seeing the relevance of variables that are not financial coming into the analysis. It's been widely accepted in Europe, particularly Northern Europe, that a lot of that data is incredibly important for the sustainability of business models. I don't know what individuals can do to promote it, but certainly the awareness is helpful. When you hear the comment, which you still do today for the majority of financial professionals in the U.S., you can't look at this. That's what you can do. Be just sort of very, very aggressive in saying, yes, you can and you should.
There's a question over there. Jillian, glasses next to them.
Thank you, Jeffrey Haslett. This is kind of a multifaceted question, but the core is what I'd like you to see if you can respond to. We wonder what motivates these men that sit in power in these industries that are harming our climate. They're so smart and intelligent, many of them. They must know what they're doing. So if they know what they're doing, why would they do that? Unless they maybe have a plan, an exit plan in their minds. We hear about crazy things about their desires to reduce the population of the world. And so then you look at that, and then you look at the fact that the cost of what they're doing is not fully loaded. So if it was fully loaded, that would change the dynamics of what you gentlemen are talking about. And so how do these kind of things come together? And in terms of divesting, is that really going to motivate them? I don't know. I'm only asking. Is that really going to motivate them because they can have enough money to buy back their own stocks? Or people that have money and power can buy into one?
It's just the right question. So let me take a quick stab at it. The first thing you said is there's no I don't think there's any secret conspiracy here. These guys are making money and have been for the last few years and are pissed and they want to keep it going. And here's one of the reasons why it's so important to be calling the whistle on them with divestment. It's not as if they're just meeting demand. Okay? They're also actively gaming the system to make sure that the system never changes. So if you invest in Chevron, you help give the largest single campaign contribution by a corporation in history 2 weeks before the last presidential election to make sure that the House stayed in the hands of climate deniers. As to the question of whether divestment will have power, not if it's the only thing that we do, we won't have enough. As one part of this strategy, it's already having enormous power. When I wrote about this, I really sort of wrote the first piece about this whole carbon bubble thing, okay, for Rolling Stone 2.5 years ago now. For those of you who keep your back issues, the one with Justin Bieber, and at the time, I mean, I thought it was an argument. It turned into the most shared article in their history, but it was, because this divestment movement sort of seized on it and ran it all over the world. That argument about the fact that we have 5 times more carbon than we can burn is now completely conventional wisdom. The World Bank says it, and Deutsche Bank says it, and everybody else says it. And so it's already beginning to erode their standing in a big way. It's beginning to drag on people. Nobody wants to lend these guys new money at this point for new work because there's no guarantee that they'll ever be able to. Why would you lend somebody money to go drill for oil that we're not going to be able to burn? It's really starting to tell, and you can tell that it is because they're pushing back in all kinds of ways, not against the argument, just against the messengers.
Pithy questions, please. Succinct and pithy. Gwen. Becker.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank all of you. My name is Gwendolyn Halsted, and I'm one of the founders of Vermonters for a New Economy. And I have a question with also part of an answer. The question is, divest to what? Because it's not sufficient to take our money out of just the fossil fuel industry just to put it in Walmart, which is shipping products all over the world using fossil fuel. And then part of the answer is that Vermonters for a New Economy has been working with the Post-Carbon Institute and Michael Schumann to draft a book for all of us. I hope you're inspired by what they said. And it's not just the pension funds that can divest from fossil fuels. You can divest from fossil fuels. And this book shows you how to do it, and shows local businesses how to do it, and shows financial professionals how to do it, and how to invest more in Vermont. And the kinds of things that we're doing in Vermont, like the state was able to do with the 10% program that I'm hoping is going to be reallocated this year, when they invested $10 million in solar production that wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for that program. So divest to what is the question?
Okay. There was a extracting fossil fuels from your portfolio, and it's about, it's published by 350.org. With Trillium and Green Century funds, which is in the back and is also available on all of our websites. So I would just point that out. It is true, you're talking about local investing, and that's something that I think Eric is probably better suited to comment on, but let's let him talk a little bit about slow money.
Thanks. Yeah, so I can take a plug for that. as was mentioned, I'm co-founder of Slow Money Vermont, and that's all about investing locally, primarily in sustainable agriculture. And we are having our first entrepreneur showcase on May 7th in White River Junction at the Hotel Coolidge, where 7 entrepreneurs, local entrepreneurs, are going to get up and tell you about the businesses and the ideas to connect prospective investors with businesses that need capital. So there's that. A very easy way to do it, though, is through Vermont Community Loan Fund, which is something that everybody can in Vermont can do, which is making loans to small Vermont businesses. But absolutely critical question, and fortunately, the opportunities are growing, and I encourage people to.
This way over here.
Well, he's taking the microphone over. I would just recommend immediately investing in beer. As far as I can tell, Vermont brewing is set to take over the entire world. That's a,
There is a malt company that is presenting at the Slow Money Showcase called Slow and Malt.
We can still be over here, people.
I have a one-sentence preamble. The Unitarian Church here divested from fossil fuels 2 years ago. Which leads to the question, and our mission statement says protect the earth, our home. What role can spiritual or religious communities play in this effort?
We are increasingly seeing religious organizations divesting, and so it's certainly important that they recognize the harm caused by the traditional energy industry, and our clients are increasingly moving to fossil fuel-free options from more traditional socially responsible options to socially responsible, including divesting from fossil fuels. I think that's sort of the role we're seeing.
Okay, 2 more questions. Over here, right up here in the front corner.
I think it's Charles Sawin. If these companies are simply becoming dinosaurs, have you seen any attempt by them to move into the renewable industry, energy industry, to keep their money afloat?
Companies like BP and Shell invested a lot of money in renewable energy about 25 years too early, and then gave up. And we're not seeing it. Companies like ExxonMobil have said, no, that's not us. We're engineers we know how to find oil and get out of there. So I haven't seen any of that. And I don't think they can compete with the renewable energy companies that are much more nimble and focused and smart now, and are starting to make a lot of money.
Okay, last one. Let's make it juicy. In the middle.
A quick thank you to you, Catherine, for speaking truth to the Ethan Allen Institute comment figure the other day. It was wonderful. My question for the panel is, we're talking about divesting from fossil fuel stocks. How about divesting the state monies from Toronto Dominion Bank, which is one of the largest investors in the Alberta tar sands? Disgusting mess.
There was a 350, and Sierra Club also organized a meeting about this campaign, and part of a few weeks ago, and part of the discussion was about TD and how to approach the state money in TD. So it's certainly something that 350 and other allies are working on.
Okay, encore. We have time for one more question. You get to pick. What?
Okay, I'm John Osborne. I'm going to ask some skeptical pushback. Well, you talk about investments, you're talking about selling financial assets for the secondary market. got the money for stocks and bonds. And, it's basically a wash, you might lose a few cents marginally, the buyer might gain a few cents, but it's basically a wash. And, there's huge markets out there. The Fed is printing money, low interest rates. And I don't believe it's more of a publicity campaign than something that has real economic effect. On the other hand, I just, when we his colleague, December, going to, yeah, okay. I was going to say, we need a carbon tax. I think it's much more important.
We do need a carbon tax. It's exactly right. We do need a carbon tax. Everybody said it for 25 years. The reason we don't have a carbon tax is not because we haven't said it enough or worked on it, it's because the fossil fuel industry owns our political system. Whenever there is a vote on anything in Congress, you can predict. I mean, I've watched this with the Keystone thing over and over again. If you tell me how much money a member of Congress is taking from the fossil fuel industry, I can predict with 100% accuracy how they will vote. More than party ID, more than what state they came from, more than anything. Okay? So we have to break the power of the fossil fuel industry before we can do any of the obvious rational things that people have been talking about forever. Things that we're all working on all the time, but we can't get done for the moment. So the idea that this is going to, that you're right, we're not going to bankrupt Exxon by selling their shares. And it's never been the idea behind this. All of us can do that math too. But what you can do is begin to politically bankrupt them. The governing example here is what happened around apartheid in South Africa. Okay? That was the only other really large-scale divestment campaign that ever really worked to really kick that large enough. When Nelson Mandela died, and lots of people then said, "Oh well, somebody else will just buy your stock or your, like that stock or whatever." When Nelson Mandela got out of prison, the first trip he took was to the United States. He did not go first to the White House. He went first to California to thank students of the UC system as representatives of the 155 colleges around the country that had divested. He said, "We fought for our own liberation, but we couldn't have done it without you." We needed that kind of external pressure too. That pressure is already starting to mount. It's the reason that Mandela's great colleague, Desmond Tutu, has been at the forefront of this fossil fuel divestment effort since it launched. He said, the greatest human rights challenge now facing the world is climate change. That's why we need you to take up this weapon again that you used 30 years ago. 30 years ago, the treasurer of the state of Vermont and the secretary of state led the country in divestment from apartheid-related stock. They didn't block the effort, as Beth Pierce is doing. They rounded up treasurers in a bunch of other states and got them on board. That's what leadership looks like, and that's what Vermont looked like, 30 years ago when we still did things in this state, before we descended into this kind of strange political paralysis that means almost nothing seems ever to get done in this town. That's why this is such a good opportunity, since it costs nothing, in fact, saves money for us all. But this would be one of the places where, as Beth said, we really get off the stick and do something for future generations. Remember the thing that she said, because it's so important, that she was bringing new and useful and interesting new data runs from the incredible computer models these guys have built. The next 10 years decides the story. Okay? If we don't get it done soon, then the mistake we've made around climate change lasts way into geological time. Okay? We're at a hinge moment. Possibilities here. We've got to just actually do it, and do it hard, and not sit around waiting for the perfect thing to happen. Not say, well, only we had a carbon tax, or only we had this or that, or whatever else. We're all working on those things. We can't get it until we break the power of this industry, an industry that at the moment the state of Vermont is in active cahoots with. So that's what the best is for.
Progressive asset management, the green guy, skinny pancake, aquavitae, syrup, and orchimedia. And also, if you're interested in personal divestment, there is a seminar on personal divestment Saturday, May 2nd in Burlington, 3:30 to 5 at Main Street Landing. You can see more about that on the 350 Vermont website. If you're interested in the carbon tax campaign, check out Energy Independent Vermont. It's a whole coalition of environment, labor, and other groups working on the carbon tax. And then ask yourself, let me leave you with these questions. What risks are you willing to take in the face of the next 10 years? What giant dreams are you willing to make real? And what holy hell are you willing to raise? Thank you so much.
So, we are going to do a parade on May 27th, Interfaith Day of Action. So I encourage you to come do it. Peaceful, non-violent revolution. Here, what do we escalate? Rising tide, North America's put forward an escalation plan this year. From collaterally with the Paris Accord. So join us. Revolution is on. Water's good. Come in.
Would you like that piece I have, Brian?
Yeah, of course. Or am I in the way of it? Yeah.